thanks, Gareth, for joining me today. We're going to have a bit of a conversation about the government consultation on debt relief orders and the outcome of that consultation that's been announced a little bit earlier this week at the time of recording. So, Gareth, if you could first just give me a bit of background about Christians Against Poverty's involvement in the consultation process with the government DROs.
Great, thanks, Helen. So I joined Christians Against Poverty as Director of External Affairs in January of this year. And on my way in the door, I was told, Gareth, we're really excited. We've been doing this research program. We want to try and influence the outside world to understand more and care more about how insolvency doesn't work for everybody yet. And I thought, this is great. Put a meeting in the calendar. I'm really interested. And then 2 days later, the government announces this consultation, which my colleagues had been doing a lot of research behind the scenes to try and build the case to make the government do the consultation. And so my colleagues are like, oh, this is so disappointing. And I'm thinking, no, it's great. It means we can be some of the first people to respond to this consultation. It means we can try and shape some of the ways that other people engage with this consultation. And so nothing's wasted. That we've been engaged. We feel like we've been engaged in this one in particular for a long time, because if it hadn't been given to us, we were going to go out and bat for it and try and require it, demand it for our sector, because it's been needed for so long. Some of the allowances in debt relief orders haven't been changed in the 12 years that debt relief orders have been around, and that's ridiculous because people's lives have changed in those 12 years, and so. We were glad that the consultation opened. We responded fairly quickly, very collaboratively. We shared a lot of our thoughts and our approach with large parts of the advice sector and others, and in fact, able to help encourage a number of other organisations engaged in the consultation who otherwise might not have. As the new head of external affairs at CAP, my first consultation response, I'm pretty happy with it. So we've been close to it. In terms of what we got and versus what we wanted, I'm happy to get into that, but I'm sure you'll have other questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to sort of give anyone who's listening a bit of background information. I read in your response to the consultation that 59% of CAP clients need an insolvency solution. And obviously a DRO is the one that's the most accessible for people who have the lowest incomes. So it was obviously really, really important to Christians Against Poverty to be involved in this because it's so impactful for your client base, basically.
That's right. And not just for those that already get DROs. It's for those who 20% of our clients at the moment have to pursue bankruptcy. But more than a third of the clients that we advise bankruptcy are only excluded from the debt relief order on that amount of debt question. Right. They would qualify if the amount of debts had been higher than £20,000, they could have gone down a 90 quid DRO route and done a 680 quid bankruptcy route. And don't get me wrong, the client, it's not like they all had 90 quid available and didn't have 680. They didn't even have the 90. But that unnecessary barrier to the insolvency route, that is the way that we as a society have agreed upon. Everybody deserves a fresh start. If you have such a catastrophic change in your circumstances and such low financial resilience, you should not have to pay back every penny until you are dead and gone. You should be able to have a fresh start. You and I would deserve it if we were in those circumstances. It's not a question of deserving or not. We've already decided it as a society. Now it's about making it work right. And for that, the third of our clients going down bankruptcy routes that could have had a debt relief order, it really did come down to a couple of these criteria that the Insolvency Service consulted upon. So we asked for the limit to go up to 50,000 from 20 up to 50 because that would have brought in more than 90% of the clients. And more than 50, we just knew, do you know what, nobody's going to even listen to us. That's going to sound like typical debt advice campaigner, wants the moon on a stick and then he'll moan. Or we'll welcome that, but more should be done. It seems sensible to us. On our evidence, on our client base, a £50,000 limit on debts would have brought into debt relief order a number of people who were only going bankrupt because of that line. The £30,000 limit that we've been given, or are about to be given at the end of, end of June, I think. That goes a long way. More than half of the clients who, 45% of the clients who are currently going bankrupt rather than debt relief order will be able to come into debt relief order. So it goes a long way to helping some people access lower cost debt relief. And when you combine that with some of the other changes that they're granting, the life lived by somebody on a debt relief order is also going to be less, fewer thumb screws, less screws till the pip squeak. So yeah, on the debt limit, we asked for 50 for those reasons. 30, okay, it's not 50, but it does help a good proportion of the people that motivated us to get into the research. It helps a good number of those.
So the one that I found really interesting, talking about the limits, that I hadn't considered until it was brought to my attention, was the £1,000 car limit. I think I just really hadn't thought about it, but we both go to the MAL groups on the Friday, and I think it was somebody at one of those that said it's such a false economy to suggest that somebody should only have a £1,000 car, because the amount they're going to end up paying in repairs and so on, compared to having a slightly higher car limit, it makes that difference up, if you see what I mean. And I'd never thought about that. And then once I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah, we're basically, it's that kind of poverty tax idea, isn't it? That by saying you can only buy the cheaper things, you're actually making somebody pay more money for those things.
That's right. The Commander Bynes boot theory is the one that Terry Pratchett fans call it.
I'm so pleased you brought that up. That is exactly what I think of it as.
The boot theory. So if people aren't Terry Pratchett fans, there's a character in the Terry Pratchett books who's a sergeant in the Men at Arms, like the police, and he spots the problem that if you only buy $40 boots and they wear out in a couple of weeks, but you don't have the money to buy the $140 boots that last for 10 years, you end up buying 8 to 10 pairs of the cheaper boots, spending way more than the more expensive boots, which I think is a beautiful description of the poverty premium, or the poverty tax as you described. That's right. So the £1,000 on the motor car, I mean, it's real for me. So I used to work at Nationwide Build Site. I had a company car because of the miles that I would do. And driving a brand new Ford Focus estate around the country, able to put thousands of miles on it without a second thought, partly because it's a new car, so more reliable, and partly because someone else is paying for the maintenance of it. Wonderful. That car went back when I left Nationwide, and my family car now has to be able to stay on the road. And my family car is not a brand new Ford Focus estate. And so it's quite real for me. I know how much I paid for this. It's a little bit more than the £1,000 limit, but not very much more. And I know how much this car has cost me in the year that I've had it too. So it's real. Now, the Insolvency Service were proposing, because as well as a £1,000 car, you can have £1,000 of other assets and still qualify for a debt relief order. And the Insolvency Service were proposing to lift the other assets to 2,000, but they didn't suggest anything about the car. And so we and others quite quickly said, hang on, this is stupid. If I was being really creative, I could call the car an asset and you'd let me keep the £2,000 car. Now, that wouldn't work if you had a lot of expensive jewelry, if you had a high-spec laptop and other things like that, because quickly you'd even go above the 2,000 for other assets. So why make debt advisors do this paperwork switch? Why not just say it's £2,000 assets and a £2,000 car, which just in terms of reliability, it's still not quite there. I understand in Scotland, the limit would more likely be 3,000. Other organisations were calling for it to be more about the age of the car rather than the price of the car. But hey, at least it's a bit more just. The rumours on the grapevine were the only reason they didn't propose the car was, oops, they forgot.
Oh, really?
Because it makes total sense, doesn't it? If you allow £2,000 of assets, have a £2,000 car too. So pleased that one came through. Within that, though, the bit that I'm most pleased about is around mobility scooters.
Right.
Now, this sounds really niche.
Okay.
So if you drive a mobility scooter because of a disability, it's not a motor vehicle necessarily. Only one of the three classes of mobility scooters are a motor vehicle. So what is it? It's an asset.
Right.
Okay, so my mobility scooter that might cost me between £800 and £3,000, maybe more, that I need as a person with a disability to engage with society. It's an adjustment under the Equalities Act. I'd be entitled to it, but I have to take it off of my asset limit, and you don't, because you're not disabled. You don't have a mobility scooter, so why should my client who drives a mobility scooter or needs a mobility scooter to access society, participate in it, why should that person not be allowed to have a little bit of family jewellery or a mid-range laptop or anything like that? What we were finding was debt advisors were, in the end, not recommending that people go for a debt relief order because they had this asset that they weren't sure how the Insolvency Service would treat it. So they were taking people down the bankruptcy route, more expensive. That's discrimination. That is a breach of the Equalities Act. And through our consultation response, we were able to help the Insolvency Service understand, look, they gave us the clarity of, oh no, mobility scooters have always been exempted. But we were able to show them the guidelines you publish to debt advisors and approved intermediaries does not make that clear at all. Right. And here is the practice that most debt advisors are following. And so your policy intent was never to have disabled people less able to engage with a debt solution, because that would be illegal. You're not allowed to have that as a policy intent. It wasn't your policy intent, but it was the impact of your guidance not matching your policy. And so we were able to quite quickly get the Insolvency Service to confirm, oh, right, well, we'll change the guidance then. And so the guidance has now been changed and is very, very clear that if the debt advisor, the approved intermediary processing the debt relief order, identifies that the mobility scooter is necessary for the individual to engage with society, then it will not be classed as an asset. Which now means that somebody with a disability and a mobility scooter and me, we both have the same asset limits applied to us, which is actually what the law is supposed to say.
That makes so much more sense, because presumably the idea of the asset limit is because those are potentially things that could be used to pay off outstanding debts. But a mobility scooter couldn't be sold to pay off outstanding debts, because then that person would be completely unable to participate in society in the way that we would expect them to. So that's, I'm so pleased that's been clarified, because that makes just so much sense to me.
It's entirely reasonable, isn't it? And the reason it's reasonable is because the law is that people with disabilities must be able to access society. It makes an awful lot of sense, and I'm thrilled that the Insolvency Service saw that very, very early on. We signalled to them before we submitted our response that we had this question for them, and they engaged with us immediately on the issue. We've been back and forth quite a lot to make sure the guidance is clear, and that's now been published to debt advisors. So that's fantastic. I'm really, really pleased with that. As far as I can tell, we were the only organisation calling for it, and we got it. So
a big win for you.
One for CAP. Now, how many CAP clients is that going to help? In reality, a few dozen. How many people across the country is it going to help? In reality, a few hundred to maybe a few thousand. But they all deserve it. If it had only helped one person, it would have been worth it. The fact it is going to help some of the most vulnerable, ensure that their rights are protected, not just in law but also in practice, then that's a happy day. That's a good day at the office that day.
Absolutely, I completely agree. So one of the things that I did find really interesting about the report that you, the Christians Against Poverty, I shouldn't keep saying you, like you just did all this stuff, but the Christians Against Poverty released in response to the consultation was with regards to the continuing stigma between bankruptcy and DROs, that DROs doesn't have that same kind of perception as bankruptcy. And I just found that really interesting. Like, is there much sort of background on why that is, or is that completely off the subject and not something that you can comment on?
So I'll have a comment on anything, Helen. So your mate down the pub thinks he knows what bankruptcy is.
Okay.
You're the guy on the Clapham omnibus. Everyone's got a view, and the idea is that somebody who's bankrupt has failed. The idea that somebody who's bankrupt might need to tell their employer or may lose their job. The reality is very different to the socially received wisdom. The socially received wisdom is bankruptcy is bad and you must have failed. It's a moral judgment about you, and you may never work again, or it's mocked up your credit file for 27 years. The reality is, do you know what? The number of professions in this country where you are not legally allowed to work in that sector and be bankrupt has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller every few years, and it's now very, very small. In fact, the people who are the kind of roles where you can't be bankrupt, you also can't really have huge levels of credit or really poor credit scores. So it's not so much to do with the bankruptcy, it's to do with your ability to manage money. Can you really be an independent financial advisor and be so upside down with your own finances, for example? Now, one of the beautiful things about the debt relief order, I think there are two elements. So the debt relief order, when it was brought in to help people with low income and low assets access a low cost form of insolvency, low income, low asset, low cost. What they began to understand was, do you know, if we just made bankruptcy free for this set of people, they may not necessarily take it, because bankruptcy feels like the thing that Mike Baldwin in Coronation Street used to do every few years, or Ian Beale in EastEnders. It feels like that kind of thing.
Tabloid fodder, isn't it? It goes in the sun.
It's a thing for people, or it's a thing for big debts. It's not a thing for me. Or I saw the stick that so-and-so got in the papers and I don't want that for myself. And so bringing in a new form of insolvency for low income, low asset, low cost, helps navigate that. Because when you're sat in a client's front room, as we do as CAP, or you're talking to them on the phone as another organisation might, and you find out their circumstances, you find out their aims and priorities, you identify the most formal solution. When you say, there's a thing called a debt relief order that can have you debt free in X weeks if we can go through these kind of paperwork and you can find a £90 fee, yes, please, I'll have one of them. When you say, it sounds like there's an insolvency route we need to pursue, and you start mentioning words that feel more loaded, it can be trickier to persuade a client to pursue the solution that you know is the best thing. Now, for me personally, I think the mark of a good debt advisor is not only skillfully identifying the best solution, but also motivating the client to pursue that and complete that route. Sure. Motivating the client right the way through to the purpose, which is normally, I want to be debt free.
Yeah.
And there's often the initial impetus of I want the door to stop knocking, but actually in the end it's I want the burden of debt lifted off my shoulders for good. And so debt relief orders, you don't have to mention the word bankruptcy. Unlike it's not like an IVA where you have to explain if you go bankrupt it'll look like this, but if you do an IVA it'll look like this. Debt relief order is relatively simple and straightforward from the client's point of view. Now, the stigma that's around bankruptcy, I wish it wasn't there, because, like I mentioned earlier in the discussion, we've agreed as a society that we all would need a fresh start if we had such a catastrophic change in our circumstances, often outside of our control. But that's a slower burn. That's going to take some more time. In the meantime, being able to clearly articulate reasons why insolvency can lead to fresh starts, why the clients that we featured in our Simplify the Solution report, none of them were out there. It's not your classic comment section of a tabloid. It's nothing to do with how many pairs of trainers or flat screen tellies you've got, and it's everything to do with how your employer treats you, everything to do with how the economy is going, everything to do with your health, which is so infrequently in your own hands. It's lots to do with your relationship status. Many numbers of us, particularly women, particularly people with disabilities, your housing status is tied so tightly to your relationship status. And if that relationship fails, you don't necessarily have the choices to go away and find alternative housing. You're trapped in something toxic, poisonous, and damaging to you. That's ridiculous. We need to fight for a fairer society. And one of the things that was included in the consultation, we weren't expecting to be included, was the disposable income question, which again comes to this: what's it like to live life on an insolvency solution? So at the moment, on a debt relief order, you go through the standard financial statement to ensure your essential costs are covered. You pay your priority bills, and then you allowed up to £50 disposable left over that you don't have to account for. The Insolvency Service consulted on that changing to 100, and and has granted 75. Now, their reason for that was, look, taking it on balance, we're taking the limit up, we're taking some of the assets up. All of that plus 100 quid just felt like we're giving everything to the debtor and we're not considering the creditor's point of view. Now, I've got a problem with that because I don't like anyone called a debtor. They're human beings. But my other problem is I'm not sure when the Insolvency Service has to balance the interests of creditor and debtor, which is legal language, do they ask creditors what they want, or do they think for them? And the creditors I was speaking to and the creditors that read my blog on the issue would tended towards being quite sympathetic about, look, for people with such low income and such low assets, why are they even on my call sheet as a collections agent? They're costing me more money to collect from than they're actually paying me when I do manage to get any money from them. Absolutely. If they're supposed to go insolvent, they should go insolvent. And most right-thinking creditors thought that way. The beauty of that 75 quid, though, is that over the course of a year, if the standard financial statement allowances work right for you, and for many households they do, but for some it's hard, you should be able to pay your essential bills, pay your housing, pay your food, get through life. £75 a month over the course of a year is not far off of £1,000 of savings that you're able to make. Now, when we're talking about reliability of car, well, there's the money to maintain and upkeep the car. When we're talking about financial resilience, are you truly debt-free if just your debts are written off, but your budget doesn't have the slack in it to help avoid debt being your safety net? Yeah. Until you're free from debt and able to save, you're probably still under the sword of Damocles of the pain of problem debt. And so the ability to start saving, the ability to start putting some amount of money, no matter how small, to one side for the future, for the rainy day, for the unexpected, that's for many of our clients, realizing they can pay their bills and they can start to save. They never dreamt that they could. And often it's that dignity and that agency that the debt advisor can grant them that is the light at the end of the tunnel. Not only is it, oh, thank you, you got me debt free, it's also and I can live like a normal person. I can have hopes and dreams and aspirations.
Well, it's that escape, isn't it, from the cycle of debt? Like you say, it's not just getting debt free; it's being able to then move forward without having to get into problem debt again. And I think what you're saying about creditors is probably very true. Like, we don't want to be knocking on people's doors that don't have the money to pay us, because that's costing us more money than it is making us. So what's the point of that? It's not useful for us. One of the things that the CAP report asked for that I haven't seen a response on, so I don't know the answer to this question, was with regards to including all previous debts, like a bankruptcy. So at the minute, DROs only include scheduled debts, and if more debts come to light, then they aren't included. And I wanted to bring this up because you were mentioning fresh starts, and one of the things that the CAP report was really emphasising was that at the minute, a DRO might not necessarily be a fresh start if more debts come to light after the application's been accepted. And so I didn't know if you knew what the outcome was on that side of things, because I haven't seen it.
Great. So the reason you didn't see a response to it in the consultation response was because it wasn't a part of the consultation.
I see.
We knew when we asked for it that we hadn't been asked for our opinion on this. It's not in the Insolvency Service's power to grant. It would need a change to primary legislation. Now, but why is it important? It's not because clients forget their debts. It's not because they're so fickle. It's important because it's a basic principle of fairness. It happens in bankruptcy, so why doesn't it happen in debt relief orders? It's important because that limit can be the difference between life and death. if you as a debt advisor have told your client debt relief order will get you debt free, but then you maybe through your own error you miss a debt that now knock here here's the door, here's the phone ringing, and you as a debt advisor told somebody that was gone. I mean, the elation of being debt free, but then the crushing blow of, oh no, there's this one who didn't make the list. You know, the creditor who most often comes in after the debt relief order and says, oh, hang on, Gareth, you've forgotten this one. It's the government. It's a tax credit overpayment or a benefit overpayment that aren't listed on credit reference agencies' files. So you're not able to go and find it out. These government departments, when you ring them or write to them to want to find out the debts that are owed by an individual, they take a long time to respond and sometimes don't respond at all. Now, that's fundamentally unfair. And so we were arguing to say, look, you need to take the debt limit up. And now if a debt that would have qualified comes to light after the date of the debt relief order, but wouldn't have taken you over the limit, it should be put on the debt relief order. They should be free from it. Our sense is that, because it's perfectly fair, our sense is that the Insolvency Service would like to do this, but it's not in their control. It needs primary legislation. And that's great, because one of the other things that they did give in their consultation response was this commitment, that they would issue a call for evidence on the wider personal insolvency landscape. In due course, they say. We think that means later this year. And what I think that means then is we get the room to raise the issues that frustrate us about debt relief orders and other forms of insolvency. We get to challenge about the £90 fee and say, look, for the number of our clients where even after 3 months of trying to save for it, they can't even get 15 quid together as a down payment on it. Chris Woolard, in his review of the entire unsecured credit landscape, recommended that there should be a bursary fund for the £90 fee to be covered for the poorest society. There should be no unnecessary barriers to a fresh start. And the £90 fee often is an unnecessary barrier, as are these qualifying debts. So that for evidence, we're really pleased that the Insolvency Service are so open-minded to the weight of evidence presented by us and others to the consultation, and the lobbying efforts behind the scenes too, to be able to say, look, we understand there are other changes that now may need to be made. We want to hear what they are so we can present to ministers the need for changes to legislation.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think sorry, my thoughts just completely deserted me there. But yeah, I think it's sorry.
I must have made such a good point.
You absolutely did. I think what I was going to say was something really, oh, well, it's great that you had all that research ready then, or something along those lines. So nothing particularly intelligent. So as you mentioned about the long time it sometimes takes to get responses from certain departments and all that kind of thing, I'm going to move us on to everybody's favourite conversation topic, which is breathing space. This is being implemented to meet the end of the first round of breathing space, basically, isn't it? So it's being scheduled for the 29th of June, which will be the end of this first set of 60 days. And I just wondered what you thought about that, because I know originally the proposals were for it to be in place in time for breathing space. So they kind of have done that for it to be in time for the end of the first set of breathing space. So just your comment.
Yeah, so I get why they've done it. I mean, they needed to look carefully at the various responses, and I'd rather a thorough consideration of the issues than a quick decision.
Sure.
And by rights, what the Insolvency Service should have given is the changes in place. So if somebody entered breathing space on the first day they could have, on May the 4th, Star Wars Day, if somebody got breathing space on that day, at the end of their 60 days breathing space, should be able to walk into a debt relief order on this scheme. That's lovely and welcome. In practice, what you will have done, what the Insolvency Service will have done, is by including the date in the consultation itself, they'll have set up some sense of expectation among the audience of people responding. It's not unknown for, well, put yourself in a debt advisor's shoes. You're sat in a living room with a client beginning of March. You know there's this consultation. Your client's got £24,000 of debts. Today, that's not a DRO. It's a £680 bankruptcy. But you have reason to believe that within the next couple of months, this could be a DRO. What do you do?
Yeah, sure.
you probably do what most reasonable people do, what I would definitely have done. You'd have said to the customer, I will try and get you some breathing space with your creditors. Can we pay some token payments? Can we make some offers? Can we get some forbearance? Because in May, you're highly likely to be able to get a debt relief order, and that'll be only 90 quid, and you've got that money. You don't have 680 quid. That's what I'd have done. That's probably what you'd have done. It's what most people would have done. So you can imagine that there'll have been a bit of a pile growing of potential DROs that the Insolvency Service had suggested. Oh, May the 4th, what do you think? It would be great if we could deliver on May the 4th, wouldn't it? That was kind of the vibes you were getting when you read the consultation. And so by it not being May the 4th, but actually June 29th, I think, that pile will just be a bit bigger. And so it's a frustration, it's a friction, but let's look at it. Civil servants have got an important job to do. They've given us nearly everything we asked for. They're absolutely going in the right direction. And importantly, they've heard us on the really important issues. They've heard us on the mobility scooter being a breach of the Equalities Act and the clarity needed. And they've heard us on, look, this consultation goes as far as you're allowed within the regulations that are in your gift, but you need to go further for these reasons. And they want to hear those reasons in more clarity, which is why the call for evidence will come in due course, they say. I hope that means later this year.
Fantastic. Well, it's been really, really wonderful to chat to you, Gareth. Thanks so much for all your insight into sort of the upcoming changes, and hopefully we'll speak again really soon.
Pleasure, Helen.